Okay, we're live. We're good to go.
All right, thanks, Jennifer. All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Public Information Center for the town of Shelburne. We're going to be having two presentations tonight, this one at 6:30 and then one following at 7:30. The first presentation that we're going to be looking at tonight is for the Schedule C Municipal Class Environmental Assessment for increased capacity of Shelburne's water pollution control plant. My name is Ian Callum. I work with Espernette Associates, the town's engineer, and I will be walking you through this presentation this evening. I've been working in a support capacity for the town's environmental assessment. The structure we're going to be holding to this evening is it's a 1 hour time slot for this first presentation session. I will be trying to keep to about 30 minutes, 35 minutes for the presentation portion, after which point you will have the opportunity to ask questions. I'd ask that if you have a question that you would please enter your name and organization and just in the chat. That way I can know that that you have a question and I can get to that when I'm done the presentation portion of tonight's meeting. I just want to draw your attention. I know it's said in the chat, but this presentation is being recorded and streamed live to the town's YouTube channel tonight. Just wanted to be transparent about that. And that even if we finish up a little bit early tonight on this first portion, we will be waiting till 7:30 in case anybody is joining just for that second session. So there may be a bit of a lag there. So in terms of background about how we got to where we are right now, Shelburne's experienced a continued rapid rate of population growth over the past 8+ years. This rapid growth has been largely attributed to the town's proximity to major centers and its small town feel. The existing wastewater pollution control plant has been operating quite effectively in terms of its ability to meet effluent regulations. That said, there has been some complaints from the public about odor, and that plant also is sort of approaching its capacity and ability to handle the types of flows that are being provided by the town. So at this point, the town has initiated a Schedule C municipal class environmental assessment process to look at the different alternatives to providing enough wastewater, not just for now, but over the next 20 years. The goal of the EA really is to narrow down the most cost-effective, environmentally sound and sustainable approach to meeting the town's future wastewater needs, looking at everything from technical, economic, social, and environmental different lenses. So as this is a Schedule C class environmental assessment, it's subject to all 5 of the different phases of the municipal class EA process. Phase 1 looks at a problem or an opportunity to help focus the study. In phase 2, you look at different alternative solutions for addressing that problem statement. Where we're at right now is that we have done some work and we've gone through an alternatives assessment, and we will be presenting a recommended alternative solution tonight to the public and agencies. So as the arrow indicates here, that's pretty much where we are right now in the process. And, you know, subject to the input that we get from agencies and public, will then be either confirming that recommended solution or looking to tweak it or revise it depending on the input that we get here tonight. From there, one of the requirements of a Schedule C is that you look at different alternative design concepts for that preferred solution to come up with the best design considerations. So it's a little bit like repeating phase 2 again, once you have the alternative solution, just so that you make sure that you come up with the best design, and it would have similar considerations around technical considerations, cost considerations, environmental considerations that help you come up with a preferred design. And there will be another opportunity once we get to that stage. We'll be having another PIC at that point where the public and agencies will have another opportunity to provide input into the process. From there, the entire process gets wrapped up into an environmental study report. A notice of completion is issued, which starts a 30-day public review period. I'm not going to get too much into detail about what that looks like at this point, but we will be providing, if you're not familiar with that stage of the process, don't worry. We will be providing more detail in our next PIC once we get a little bit closer to that point. And as long as there aren't any objections and that 30-day public period closes, you then move on to detailed design, tendering, and construction of the preferred solution and design concept. So looking at the existing water pollution control plant, it's an Class 3 extended aeration treatment plant with tertiary filtration and ultraviolet disinfection. Peak flows are currently managed through the use of a set of storm ponds for temporary storage, and we can all see that on the figure on the left-hand side there. Plant effluents discharge from this treatment plant to the Besley Drain, which is a minor tributary to the Boyne River, which then flows into the Nottosauga River. Based on review of plant performance reports, the plant is performing well and has been meeting effluent concentration requirements of its environmental compliance approval. And there have been no recorded bypasses over the past 10 years. The current rated capacity for this plant is 3,420 cubic meters per day. And it does have a peak capacity that is quite a bit higher than that of just under 9,000 cubic meters per day. The effluent limits, just I sort of alluded to a little bit earlier, the effluent limits for this facility are regulated by an environmental compliance approval, which has been issued by the Ministry of the Environment, Conservation and Parks, MECP. And that just sort of regulates for a set of different parameters, concentration limits that are able to be discharged to the environment. So were the town to choose to increase the capacity of this treatment plant as its preferred alternative solution, that would require amendment of that ECA, and it would need to be approved again by MECP. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide here, but I did bring it up just for the purposes of showing different stages of either approved, planned, future development that's in the planning phases by the town of Shelburne. And it's these increased development areas that are in part driving the increase in population projections that we've taken into account as part of this EA planning exercise. And for the purposes of planning out for like a 20-year window for wastewater treatment capacity for the town, we've been assuming that all of these areas do get developed. And I think as we see on this next slide, our population projections that we're using with that full built out maximum population, we are looking at a population of 15,000 over the next 20 years. So that is the treatment capacity for wastewater treatment that we're looking at, that we're using for this EA exercise. So this is shown a little bit again here. Breaks down a little bit how what the wastewater treatment capacity looks like over the next 20 years as this population grows. To come up with those numbers, we have been using an 11-year average residential per capita demand use of 266 liters per capita per day, plus an additional 28% for industrial, commercial, and institutional flows. And as the number here, the 3420 is the existing capability of the treatment facility, with the peak that we mentioned of just under 9,000 that I mentioned a little earlier. And you can see here in 2021, we're extremely tight up against that 3420 in terms of the average daily flow. And as we go out to 2022 and to 2041, the current treatment plant is not able to meet the projected need of 5,100 cubic meters per day, with a peak flow of just over 10,000. So the alternative solutions that were considered in the EA to date include a do-nothing option, which is a required consideration of any Class EA process. And it just really speaks to what would things look like if absolutely no actions were taken. We also looked at increasing water efficiency and extraneous flows, flows that get into the sewer pipes that increase the amount of wastewater treatment that needs to occur, and upgrading and expanding the existing wastewater treatment plant. We did look at two different numbers. Historically, or several years back, population number projections were slightly lower, so a lower number was used, the 4,400 instead of the 5,100 cubic meters per day. And we decided to keep that number around just to sort of see, just to provide the town some options and some different level of evaluation that, you know, if 4,400 cubic meters was allowed a certain technology and 5,100 bumped you up to a completely different technology, that would allow the town to see what that difference looked like and to compare it to see which way they wanted to go with that. The next option we looked at was a second treatment plant that would just deal with the additional flow above and beyond the 3,420 cubic meters per day. Another option considered abandoning and decommissioning the existing facility and building something new. And the last option considered was a pipeline connection to a neighboring municipality's treatment system, with a number of different municipalities that were considered there. So from all those different options, we undertook a preliminary screening just in terms of getting rid of some of the options that weren't feasible at all. And so this slide kind of shows that, you know, similar to a coffee filter, how you would start with all your alternatives, and the ones that don't meet the criteria listed here on the right in terms of it not being viable, doesn't use a proven technology, not technically feasible, not consistent with planning objectives, and some of these other considerations here that are listed. Those options were taken out of consideration and weren't further considered through the environmental planning process. So the do nothing option was one of the options that was screened out using this preliminary screening, given that it doesn't provide a viable solution to the problem and it doesn't meet future planning needs identified in the official plan. And given how tight the current treatment capacity is up against what the current demand is, really the do nothing option wasn't considered as something that was a viable option. So the town of Shelburne has been doing over the past years, 5 to 7 years, a lot of work and has done a really good job actually of increasing water efficiency and extraneous flow reduction, and has been able to cut down the amount of flow going to the treatment plant, which has considerably reduced demand. And really at this point, there just isn't enough efficiency that can be squeezed out anymore through future improvements that would allow the type of increased capacity required to get us to that 5,100 cubic meter number or anywhere near it. So for that reason, this tier option wasn't considered viable either. And the new pipeline, really it's the cost of it estimated somewhere in the order of $50 million. And that was probably without even considering treatment costs that would be passed on by the neighboring municipality. That option was just price prohibitive and therefore also was screened out at this stage. So a lot of information here to try and digest in this kind of a presentation format. But for the options that were left at this, that made it through that initial screening, a further method of evaluation was that basically a weighted alternative was used at this stage to come up with a preferred alternative solution. I alluded to this earlier. It took into consideration technical, environmental, and social impacts. Each of those was weighted equally, and each of them considered a number of different criterion that fed into that weighted analysis. You know, an example for environmental, just to give you an idea, would be does the alternative solution comply with the environmental regulations? And for each category, the most important criteria was selected just based on experience for the most part and based on regulations and that kind of thing. And every other criterion was then compared to that as being equally important, slightly less important, or significantly less important. And that allowed us to come up with a bit of a weighted analysis for each criterion. And then for each of those, it was then the question was then asked whether the alternative solution completely meets the criteria, somewhat meets it, or doesn't meet it at all. And so that was then added up. And actually, sorry, before we get to that, jump to the punchline a little too quickly there. These were, the slide here lists the criteria that were used in the evaluation, broken down by each of the major headings. So for technical feasibility, we looked at the ability to meet effluent requirements, system reliability and efficiency, ease of operation and maintenance, suitability to connect to existing system-specific requirements. Under environmental, we looked at compliance with environmental regulations, impacts on terrestrial and aquatic habitat, including species of conservation concern, and also the ability to mitigate impacts. Economic feasibility, we looked at capital cost, operation and maintenance cost, life cycle cost analysis, economic sustainability, and site-specific costs. We also, under social, looked at financial implications for residents, conformity to local planning provisions, impacts on quality of life, implementation timeline, and some longer term planning considerations. So based on that weighted analysis, I'm not going to get into the breakdown of how we came up with these numbers, but I will say that printouts of that an assessment are available if you're interested. And based on that assessment, you can see here the highest number out of a possible total of 100 in terms of meeting all the criterion that were considered. By a small margin over the 4,400 cubic meters per day, the 5,100 cubic meter per day option did come out as the preferred as the recommended alternative solution. One major piece of the puzzle that weighed into the alternatives assessment and is a key part of this environmental planning process is an assimilative capacity study. And this is a study that basically looks at the Boyne River and the water quality in that river. And through the use of a model called the Qual2K model, it looks at what is the ability for that water course to accept effluent, and at what concentrations of a variety of parameters is it able to accept that without adversely affecting the water quality of that water course. And so Espernette and Associates undertook that just this, I guess, through late 2019 and early 2020. And the effluent limits that were used in this model were based on that maximum flow rate of 5,100 cubic meters per day. And through consultation with the Ministry of the Environment, Conservation and Parks, the proposed effluent limits that were included in a report based on that modeling effort were accepted on April 30th by the ministry. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time here on this slide, but it just sort of, it shows what the current limits at the 3,420 cubic meters per day are for typical parameters for a wastewater treatment plant, and shows how some of these parameters have had to have lower limits set because of the increased flow that'll be coming out through the effluent discharge. So for example, you had a compliance limit previously of 0.25 milligrams per liter of phosphorus, which is now dropped down to 0.12 to achieve the same level of water quality that's currently in the Boyne. So this is just alluding a little bit to the next stage, but our design team has just sort of started thinking about and working through conceptually some of these designs at this point. Some of the major treatment options that are going to be considered through this next phase, this would be phase 3 of the Class EA process, will be processes such as extended aeration with nitrification and denitrification. Then the nitrification and denitrification being required to meet some of the nitrate and ammonia limits set based on that assimilative capacity modeling. Second option being sequencing batch reactor with nitrification and denitrification, and membrane technology being the third. We're also using this opportunity to upgrade some older equipment or to address some of the operational challenges that are being encountered at present by the current plant operator. And just addressing the odor issue that I alluded to a little bit earlier, one of the design concepts under evaluation is to repurpose the stormwater ponds. And basically, instead of diverting water at the front end as it comes into the wastewater treatment plant, the stormwater holding ponds would be used as something called an effluent polishing pond which would only be there to accept treated water that had passed through the treatment plant, just in a case where it didn't quite meet an effluent limit and needed to be brought back through the treatment plant again before it was sent out to the Besley drain and then the Boyne ultimately. So the idea there is that would significantly bring down the odor by putting treated water instead of water coming at the front end of the process into those stormwater ponds. A variety of different funding opportunities will be considered as we go through this process to come up with revenue to help to fund this, to fund the alternative solution. And in terms of next steps that we're looking at here, we will take any input that we get here tonight to confirm the recommended solution, that being of upgrading and expanding the existing wastewater treatment plant to a rated capacity of 5,100 cubic meters per day. We'll then go a little further into detail of evaluating different design concepts for upgrading the wastewater pollution control plant. We'll be holding another public information center similar to these ones to come up with all those different design concepts, to walk you through those, and then to recommend, based on the work that we've done to that point, the recommended design concept. And based on your public and agency input at that time, we'll be selecting a design concept and moving through the next stages of the EA. So that concludes the formal presentation portion of this survey. A survey will be sent to you 30 minutes after the second presentation tonight. So, roughly at around 8:30, between 8:30 and 9 o'clock tonight, you'll receive a survey which will provide you the opportunity to provide written feedback on tonight's meeting and on the wastewater treatment options that were discussed here tonight. With that, I will stop sharing the presentation and I will look to the chat to see if we have any questions here.
Yeah, so I've just been monitoring it there, Ian, and I think Emma was the first one to bring up for questions, and then I think we have a few others as well. So maybe if you don't mind, Emma, just because it is being recorded, if you can maybe introduce yourself and company, even though I know you already have in the chat, and then we'll move through each group's questions, if that's okay.
Thank you, and thanks very much for the opportunity to ask these questions and for you to host such a forum to make public consultation available at this time. We really appreciate that. I'm Emma West. I'm a partner at Bousfields, and we're working with Flatto Developments. And my question relates to the population numbers. And I'm just looking for some clarification, because I think what I heard this evening was that for the areas shown on the map that was shown as a part of the presentation that were identified as approved areas for development, that is what made up the population forecast of 15,000. But I've also read the Hempson DC background study. And in that, it says that the 15,000 people that they project, and they seem to project that that's by 2029, that would be achieved on lands already designated for development and doesn't include lands currently designated as non-urban on the west side of town, which would include the Flatto lands. So my question is, does the 15,000 population number that's being used as a part of this analysis include the lands that go all the way over to Fourth Line?
You want to take this one, Steve?
Yeah, and I think Steve Weaver may be on the line with us as well, or at least I had seen him there. So what I'll maybe answer, and then I can let you answer to follow up with that, Steve, if that's okay. So the numbers are based on the town's planning numbers and projections, and my understanding is that it does include the lands on the west side, but maybe Steve, if you can provide clarity to that.
Yeah, thank you, Steve, and good evening, everyone. My name is Steve Weaver with GSP. So GSP provides the town's planning services. Yes, there is a recent DC study that has more up-to-date forecast information. I think some of the charts that have been used for the EA predate the most recent forecast information, and we expect the forecast will continue to be updated as this process moves along, in particular as the county moves further through its MCR process and starts to release population and housing and employment numbers by local municipality. We do have a rough idea of how much population can be accommodated within the current urban boundary, and we think that number is somewhere between 10,000 and 11,500. There are new development proposals and applications coming in that are starting to crystallize that a little bit. And in addition to that, we've had some estimates prepared for the expansion land. So you may see information through this process or previously that shows lower forecasts, including all of the land in the town, including the urban expansion area. But the way things are shaping up, it does look like when you factor in the expansion land, we'll get well beyond the 13,000 and upwards of 15,000, maybe even a bit beyond that. The intent with this EA process, and similarly the water EA, is to rate the plant to accommodate the full build out of the land in the town boundary, including the urban expansion. So the information through this process is also being shared with the county, and they're aware now that the town has received some acknowledgement from the ministry about the assimilated capacity study, as well as the plan to upgrade servicing systems to achieve a 15,000 population. So we're hopeful that that will continue to inform their exercise and the population that they allocate to the town.
Could I ask a quick follow-up question on that? So, Steve, you said that the DC background study had more up-to-date forecasts than some of the analysis in this process.
Yeah.
And so I'm just wondering if, for example, the forecast number was the 15,000 that Hempson had quoted that doesn't include full build out of all of the lands. Is there actually capacity in the proposed concept to go beyond 15,000? Do you know what I'm saying? So if the number of the 15,000 in this EA process is assuming that that's full growth for the boundaries of the town, versus another population forecast that Hempson had put together that was 15,000 that didn't include the lands on the west side, would this upgrade and this EA process then take into account that the population might actually be higher than 15,000?
I think it will, yes. Some of the other numbers that may change through the process as well relate to continued monitoring of the flows through the plant. So the forecasts and flows that relate to those population numbers are based on some assumptions that predate those DC numbers, such as household size. And we are in the process now with SBA of updating per capita flow numbers based on most recent year flow data. So we think that although those forecasts from Hempson show a higher number within current approved areas in the OP, that the amount of capacity that will result from this EA process will be sufficient and is intended to accommodate development in the expansion area as well. So possibly that's beyond a 15,000 population.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. Thanks.
I believe I believe Nick had come forward second with the question. So if you'd like to go ahead now, Nick, and just reintroduce yourself if you don't mind.
Hello, everybody. I'm Nick Karakis with Cole Engineering. I'm part of the engineering project team for the Flato lands. I have 3 questions. One's a follow-up to Emma's question and comments. With the it does appear that the expansion lands do include the lands over by Fourth Line. And so what I would like to ask is, going forward on future figures, if those lands could also be identified as part of the study area for the EA.
And just for clarity on that, Nick, they were identified in the map. It may be because it doesn't have a stage 1, 2, or 3 and identified, and it may have just slipped and not come across clear. But the dotted boundary that you'll see, it kind of shows up in gray on that page.
Yes.
Does show the build out area, and that was the intent of that slide being in the presentation. So because it does not, those lands are not within the current urban boundary and cannot kind of be identified with a stage because of such, it is identified just with the boundary dotting around it.
Okay, thank you for that. If I may, another question relates to with the assimilative capacity study, understanding that the Besley drain does have some limitations. If I understand correctly, the ministry has approved the 5,100 cubic meters per day of flow. Is there any ability for the drain to accommodate additional flow, or is that the maximum capacity?
I can speak to that one if you want there, Steve.
Yeah, go ahead.
So for the actual Besley drain, through consultation with the ministry, it was determined that for the modeling purposes, the Besley drain was considered a pipeline to the Boyne River with no assimilative capacity whatsoever, just because there's some periods of the year where there's extremely low flow in the drain and such a high proportion of the flow comes from the treatment plant. But in terms of the Boyne River, what the modeling effort did was it basically said, if under the current 3420, it took 2 kilometers for, say, total phosphorus to return to baseline, we selected a new effluent level that ensured that at 5,100, it still was 2 kilometers to attenuate to that same concentration. So by lowering the effluent limit coming out of the plant, we're able to have the same distance of attenuation from the confluence point of the Besley drain and the Boyne. So I guess to your question, if we were to go higher than 5,100 cubic per meters, it would require different effluent limits to have that same level of agreement.
Okay. And by different effluent limits, what does that mean? Like new approval from the ministry?
Yeah, we would have to, it would have to go through another approval process with the ministry to approve the modeling that came up with the numbers, and then the numbers themselves. And it would also, we'd have to look at whether those numbers were achievable under the technology that's currently being proposed.
Okay.
Just for your information, some of the numbers, some of the concentrations like ammonia were extremely sensitive to even like a 0.5 change in concentrations. It would result in like a 3-4 kilometer difference.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for that. And if I may, just one last question. Relating to cost, I'm sure from the presentation, it seems obvious that the treatment plant definitely does require upgrades, and I'm sure these upgrades are coming at a significant cost. Has a consulting team looked at the cost comparison between updating or expanding the existing treatment plant versus a new treatment plant, and how do the costs compare?
I'll maybe answer that one, Nick. So we are in the process and have been comparing. The planning level was done and compared. We're now actually in the process of going through that same costing assessment on the more detailed options as was noted. And that work should be done sometime by mid-August and be able to be released in the next PIC.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you for letting me for the opportunity to ask questions. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Nick. Kat, I believe you were maybe next for questions.
Thank you, Stephen. My name is Katerina Slava. I'm a land use planning and development lawyer with Dentons Canada for Flato Development. Stephen, I think you and Steve Weaver have already answered my questions in your responses to Emma and Nick. And I don't mean to belabor this one, but I just want to make sure that I follow because I think it cut out a little bit when Steve Weaver was referencing this. So I think I heard that the intent is to rate the plant to accommodate the expansion lands, which include the Flato lands. But I want to make sure that I'm clear on that because I lost my connection a little bit.
I can confirm that, yeah, and I apologize, that may have been my connection as well. Mine was jumping a little bit. And when I was responding there to Emma's question, I apologize because I didn't have the DC forecast right in front of me. Everyone looks frozen. Can you hear me?
I caught that,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so the DC identifies a forecast of 11, just over 11,000 people in the year 2029.
Maybe you
And
cut out.
sorry, yeah. So the development charge study, I'll say that part again. Hopefully my internet is going to get me through this. Is just over 11,000 people in the year 2029. And that's the anticipated forecast with all of the land currently designated in the urban boundary. The 15,000 build-out forecast referenced in the DC study, although the DC study refers to land already designated for development, the build-out is considering all land in the town boundary. So there is some cost and some infrastructure assigned to what we call post-period growth in the DC. And that really is referring to things beyond 2029, which for the purposes of the DC is any land outside of the urban boundary. And not to say that urban expansion can't happen sooner than that, but for the purposes of the DC, they base the 10-year forecast on the current urban boundary at 11,000 people, and the 15,000 is based on full build out of the total land in the town of Shelburne beyond 2029.
Thank you. And just a quick follow-up. I wondered, Stephen, you mentioned that Schedule B1 includes the lands with, I guess it's a dotted line because they're outside of the urban boundary. Would you be able to run a cursor around that so I can follow? Maybe it's the coloring on my end, but I just wanted to make sure that I'm following this.
Yeah, can you share the screen again, Ian, just for?
Yeah, I'll pull that one up. Just give me a sec here.
Thank you.
And it's referred to as the town boundary in the presentation as he brings it up. So I don't know if you're going to have to probably use your cursor, Ian, but if you can just the gray. No, you were on the right page.
Yeah, I just went to presentation mode and lost it here.
Oh, there you go. So yeah, that's the gray boundary, and then there's another piece down at the south end.
Small little piece
that
there.
is included there as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks for the clarification and your indulgence. I don't have any other questions.
I don't believe anyone else had come into the chat group with a question, but maybe we'll just ask before going forward whether there's anyone else that's on the line or anyone that may have any questions or comments on anything that was brought up this evening. As Ian had indicated earlier, there will be a form sent out that does give the public or anyone attending that opportunity again, but we'll maybe just ask one last time before we sort of wrap up this session, if anyone has any other questions. Okay, well, I haven't seen anyone waving madly or anyone coming forward. So I would think at this point we'll bring this evening's session for this presentation to a close. We do very much appreciate everyone that has attended, and I think, Jennifer, we could probably then go not live for the next few minutes, and then we probably have 9 minutes before we'd start the next presentation. For anyone that is sticking around for both, by all means, that's great, and anyone else that may join us at 7:30.
Thank you. So we just stay on this link.
Yeah, it's just the one. It's just the one link, correct, Jennifer?
That's correct. I'm just going to pause everything for now, and then we'll start it back up at 7:30.
Okay,
Okay.
great. Thank you.
Great. Jennifer, if you can maybe let us know when we're no longer live on the previous one, we would maybe then just upload the presentation on the second one, just so we're ready for the group that may join us, if that's okay.
Sure, no problem. I'm just trying to figure that out.
Well, and or if you'd want them to be all together, that's okay too. If you don't want to drop it and just leave it live.
Won't let me pause the live stream, so we might as well just keep going. It's just going to just.
That's fine. That's fine, Jennifer. We're probably only 4 minutes out, so we can just put up the other screen and
Yep,
that presentation will start right at 7:30, I would think. 'Cause
sure.
If you and Jim are in agreement, I think everyone's been able to join that's going to be part of it. So we'll start it right at 7:30, I think, if that's okay.
That's correct, yeah. Right now, it's just folks from the Flato group, so
Okay.
no one else that was on the list has joined us.
Okay. Well, we'll wait right up to the 7:30 mark then, just to stay with what we'd indicated, and then you can start at that point.
Sounds good.
All right, 7:30. So I think we'll get started with our second presentation this evening on behalf of the town of Shelburne. Looks like we have the same participants in attendance here. So I'm going to skip with some of the formalities that we had at the start of the first presentation and get right into it. So our second presentation this evening is regarding the water supply Schedule B municipal class environmental assessment for the town of Shelburne. This is the first public information center for this project. Similar background to in our last presentation regarding the town experiencing a rapid rate of growth. And one of the issues that the town has had to manage historically regarding its groundwater supply that is the source of all water, drinking water for the town, is that it's the shallow aquifers that are present in and around the town of Shelburne result in high levels of arsenic that at times can exceed provincial drinking water standards if not treated or blended with water with lower concentrations. So that's something that the town's had to look at historically to make sure that it's meeting the provincial drinking water standards. So in response to the growth that the town is experiencing, the town initiated this Schedule B municipal class environmental assessment to determine the best means of ensuring that residents have a safe and adequate drinking water supply for the next 20 years. The EA will look to find a blend of the most cost-effective, environmentally sound and sustainable approach to meet the town's future water supply needs. So this being a Schedule B municipal class EA, this undertaking is only subject to 3 of the 5 class EA phases. The first phase being to identify the problem, which we kind of alluded to here a little earlier in the previous slide, but we'll get into that a little bit more clearly in the next slide, I believe. From once you have a clearer picture of the problem or opportunity, looking again at different alternative solutions to addressing that problem or opportunity, and through consideration of technical, environmental, economic, and social criteria and considerations, and weighing those through a weighted assessment, you can come up with a recommended alternative solution. That actually isn't quite where we are here at this stage. My apologies for this slide. Right now, we have not come up with a recommended solution at this time. We are still in the process of looking at the different alternative solutions. So please ignore that arrow on this slide. We're not quite that far along in the process yet. But when we do get to that point, we will be coming to the public to validate and get feedback on what we are proposing as the recommended alternative solution. Once we've incorporated public and agency feedback regarding that preferred solution, there'll be another public information session to discuss that. The process then moves to the 30-day public and agency review period. And as long as there's no objections during that part of the process, the project is then able to proceed to detailed design and construction. So this slide looks at the existing water supply for the town. The town of Shelburne is currently supplied by 6 production wells from 4 pump houses, PW1, PW3, and these are production well notations here. Production well 5, production well 6, production wells 7 and 8. Currently, water from production wells 5, 6 are blended with water from production wells 7, 8 to meet Ontario drinking water standards, specifically for arsenic. So just a little background on that. Production well 7, 8, that well was drilled into a much deeper aquifer that doesn't result in the same levels of arsenic as we're seeing in the shallow aquifers in and around the town. So that lower concentration of arsenic can be blended with the higher concentration that we see in production wells 5, 6, and the resulting water meets the drinking water standard, the provincial drinking water standard, that is. Some of the town's older wells, we're looking PW1 and PW3, have deteriorated over time, resulting in lower production rates. And currently production well 1 actually has dropped to a level where the well has in fact been shut down. The graph below here proportionally shows where the existing supply of 44 liters per second or 36 cubic meters per day comes from in the town of Shelburne. And there's the 0 up there just to denote the shutdown of PW1. This figure here is just some of the basis of the population projections that are being used to come up with the water supply that the town will need over the next 20 years, and shows the different stages and of development within town boundaries, and some areas shown in light gray hatching that are outside the current town boundaries. Our intention is to consider through this EA process the entire built out area for the town of Shelburne. And using that number, or using that consideration of the entire built out area, our current projection is for the town to have a population as high as 15,000 by 2041. And that's the current basis of our projections and what we're designing to in terms of water supply. The graph here, the dashed line in red there shows the existing capability of the production wells to provide just under 4,000 cubic meters per day of water for the town of Shelburne. The line in blue is the projected average water daily demand. And so you can see that currently the town is able to meet that. But as shown from the green line above it, the projected maximum daily water demand, and this is the sort of demand that you might get on a hot August day in a given hour, that maximum daily water demand is not currently able to be met, both now and looking into the future 20 years. So and part of this is resulting from the shutdown of PW1, so that on a really hot, dry day or a couple of those days strung together, that would place some significant strain on the existing water supply. So our problem statement for this environmental assessment is that the current water supply in the town of Shelburne is not sufficient to meet anticipated demands placed by a growing population over the next 20 years. So based on that problem statement, as part of the CA process, we came up with a set of alternative solutions that could address this problem statement that will be evaluated and weighed through the EA process. The do nothing alternative, part of any class EA, is if no action at all was taken to address the problem statement, what would that look like? We're also going to be looking at increasing water efficiency to see whether that is sufficient to meet demand over the next 20 years. We are going to be looking at the rehabilitation of wells 1 and 3. We talked about their production having declined significantly over time, and to see whether rehabilitation could improve that production back closer to what they were originally permitted to supply. The EA will also be looking at pumping of wells 7 and 8 concurrently at 18.9 liters per second each. Currently, only one of the wells is able to pump at that rate, or the two wells up to that rate. But modeling has suggested that that rate may be able to be increased, and so we'll be doing additional testing to confirm that, whether that's possible. The EA will also be looking at locating and developing a new well as a potential option to determine whether that's viable. Adding arsenic treatment to wells 5, 6. So currently wells 5, 6, I had talked about them being blended with well 7, 8 a little bit earlier. And because of that blending, wells 5, 6 production has to be somewhat curtailed beyond what it could possibly produce at its maximum pumping rate, just to maintain that the arsenic concentrations below provincial standards. And the last option considered through this EA will be to limit community growth. And by limiting community growth, you would be reducing the water supply demands over the next 20 years. So where we are at right now, a 70-hour pump test with larger pumps will be conducted this summer for wells PW7 and PW8 to confirm modeling predictions that that higher rate of 37.6 liters per second could be sustainably maintained. During that pump test, we'll be monitoring neighboring wells as well as some new monitoring wells to get a really good idea of any potential impacts that that higher pumping rate may be having on adjacent wells or environmental features. Rehabilitation work has already been conducted at wells PW1 and PW3, and preliminary results suggest that that the pumping rate will be able to be increased as a result of this work. So, but although the outlook looks good right now, this will need to be confirmed this summer through an additional 72-hour pump test. The town met on June 12th with the Grand River and Nottawasaga Conservation Authorities to discuss source water protection requirements that would be required as a result of increasing the pump rate at wells PW7 and PW8. The location of those wells is pretty much right on the boundary between the Grand River and Nottawasaga watersheds. So that's the reason why we've been engaging both of the conservation authorities to make sure that we meet any of the requirements of that source water protection regulations and legislation. So in terms of next steps, spoke a little bit earlier about completing some pump tests for wells BW1 and 3, as well as BW7 and 8, to confirm higher sustainable pumping rates and to determine and to quantify and understand influence on adjacent wells in the environment and environmental features. We'll be evaluating and comparing different alternative solutions, the ones presented here today, to arrive at a recommended alternative solution through a weighted analysis that looks at environmental, social, technical, and cost considerations. As part of this EA process, we will be meeting all source water protection requirements, and we'll be conducting another public information center to present the results of the pumping tests, as well as to get your feedback on a recommended alternative solution that comes out of that weighted assessment that I just spoke of. Lastly, once we've incorporated public input and agency input from that public information center, we'll be looking to file a notice of completion and start a 30-day public and agency review period. And the EA documentation will be made available at Town Hall and online to review at that time. So a link to A survey will be sent to you within 30 minutes of the end of this presentation and question period. And the survey will provide you the opportunity to provide input on tonight's meeting and the water supply options that will be taken under consideration through the next stages of the CA process. So with that, I think we'll start our question and answer period. Steve, if you've been monitoring the chat group to see whether there are any questions.
Yeah, I believe Emma has indicated that she has a question, so maybe we'll open the floor up to you, Emma.
Thank you. I'm Emma West from Bousfield. And again, I appreciate the opportunity to participate in your PIC for the environmental assessments tonight. My questions are similar to the ones we asked for the wastewater, but I just wanted to make sure for this separate environmental assessment process that we clarify again in terms of the 15,000 for the future population that's being used in this study, that includes lands within the full boundary of the town. I know that Ian was mentioning the entire built out area, but I just wanted to confirm that that would include all of the lands, in particular for my client Flato developments that extend to Fourth Line. And then my second part of that question is a confirmation that those lands, the Flato lands, are included in the study area for the environmental assessment. So one about the population and what assumptions are used for the 15,000, and then two are the Flato lands on the west side of the town included in the study area.
So I believe following up on a similar answer as Steve Weaver had in the first presentation, is that although the DC study may allude differently, the lands are being included. The town boundary as shown on the map was the boundary which includes your client's lands are being included, and the 15,000, as we said earlier, is based on sort of that projection out to include, I guess, what's referred to as the town boundary on this map.
And so just to confirm, with the study area for the EA is also the town boundary?
Yeah, to be honest with you, the study area for the EA actually extends quite beyond the town boundary, because as Ian alluded to, one of the wells is approximately, well, maybe we didn't mention this, but well 7-8 is approximately 4 kilometers outside of the town boundary and actually in a neighboring municipality at the split of the Nottawasaga and the Grand River Divide. So the study area itself, actually, to take into consideration the source water protection components, actually extend well beyond the town boundary.
Okay, thank you. I have no further questions. Thanks again.
Okay, thanks, Emma. I believe Emma was the only one that had indicated questions, but we'll definitely open the floor up to anyone that may have questions on this particular presentation. And by all means, if anyone has additional questions, please wave wildly or come forward or add it to the chat. Okay, well, it doesn't appear like anyone else has any questions. So if we don't have any other questions at this point, as Ian had indicated, everyone will get a survey within the next half hour or so for both presentations, both the original Schedule C Class EA for the water pollution control plant and wastewater, as well as for the water supply EA Schedule B EA that we're working on. So I would think at this point, if no one either from the town or anyone in attendance has any other statements or comments, we just want to thank everyone for accommodating us this evening under this format, and we appreciate that it's a wee bit unique, but I think it actually worked out quite well, both from the town and attendance perspective. So we want to thank everyone, and I think we will adjourn the presentations at this point.